Okay, now it's good. Welcome back to this third session, actually, in film and science whole day arrangement we are doing. And on behalf of Copenhagen Docs, I'd just like to say welcome. In a minute, I'll pass the word to David, but first of all, just to explain this whole session will be 1 hour and 45 minutes. So it will be 2 film clips and 2 debates. But one of the architects behind ESOF, David Butz Pedersen, will tell you much more about that. So give him a big round of applause.
Thank you. Thank you very much for coming here and being here. It's a great pleasure to welcome you to this session on Alfred and Katja's film, but also on a very exciting panel debate that we are going to have the next hour and a half. It's my pleasure also to welcoming you officially to ESOF and to the Science in the City program. I am, as it was just said, one of the architects, I would say one of several or even many architects behind the ESOF conference that takes place these days in Copenhagen. We are very much, we are very grateful that you are all here and that things are coming together very nicely today, tomorrow, and hopefully for the rest of the week. I guess we will be more than 4,000 people coming and discussing science in and for society. So that's a really nice thing. I also want to thank Copenhagen Docs and for organizing this afternoon and for putting science and documentary filmmaking on the agenda. That is a very important and emerging topic that I myself is particularly happy to see evolving. In the same spirit, I also want to just say a few words about the topic of this afternoon session. I guess that the film that we are about to see some chapters from will pretty much explain the essence of the idea of collaboration. But I also think it's important in the context of ESOF and even in the context of how the global science system is evolving for the moment to say a few words about why is collaboration so important. So first of all, I want to mention one recent article that was published in Nature a couple of months back in the end of last year, where the authors actually argued that research today has moved into what they called a fourth age of science. The first age of science was the individual scientist working pretty much alone and publishing his own papers, doing research in what was at that point known as the ivory tower. Later on, it came to the institution. People began to work together collectively within the confines of the single institution, primarily the single university or even company. Later on, I guess, especially in the 90s and end of 90s, there was a lot of focus on the nation state, actually. The national research capacity or the national innovation system was concepts that policymakers all around the world was very much interested in. But what is very interesting about that article in Nature is that they show, based on, I guess, if I remember it correctly, 25 million published peer-reviewed papers, they show that today's science has become collaborative, that the actual nexus, the actual place of research today is collaboration. So there are no more individuals. There are individuals out there, of course, but there are not that many individuals that work totally in isolation. Even there is not many universities that work in isolation, or even nation states that work in isolation. So when you look into the research publications today that actually get published and also get cited, most of them are based not only on co-authorship, but also on collaboration among disciplines and between disciplines, and the same goes between countries and regions of the world. So in that sense, collaboration is very much emerging as the new normal or the new standard, and that is worth, I guess, celebrating, which we are then actually trying to do at ESOF. So ESOF as a conference is also a way of trying to highlight how can collaboration actually take place, how does it look like in real time, where people from different parts of the science community actually have to meet and talk to each other and where filmmakers, as today, this afternoon, has to talk to scientists, or earlier today, where we had all the, let's say, the citizens from Copenhagen and abroad coming to the Carlsberg area to meet science and to meet the scientific institutions. What is the meeting place between science and society when it gets really material and specific? So that's part of what we are trying to achieve with ESOF. It involves art installations. It involves computer games, collective learning, different types of experiments that you can take part of. So it's not only about showcasing the research product, the knowledge we gained after having done a lot of research, but it's also kind of an attempt to open up the research process, and for people coming from different disciplines, different regions of the world, and even different parts of society to actually get to know the scientific community. And I think this really overlaps and even connects really well to the program that we are about to host this afternoon. I will give the word in 1 second to Katja, who will introduce the film and also the speakers of this afternoon session. But I guess I can say with some confidence and hopefully also some consensus among both speakers and organizers that collaboration is essential, not only to ESOF as a small Danish conference, but also to the whole of the global science system. So welcome to the session. So please, Katja is now about to present the ideas behind the documentary. Welcome.
Thank you. I might actually argue against collaboration being the new norm, because there's no way collaboration is easy, and that's part of why we're also here. My name is Katja, and this is my husband Alfred. And what I would like to talk to you about today. Okay, is there anybody who can't hear me when I'm just speaking? Do I need a microphone?
It's getting recorded.
Oh, it's getting recorded. So I'm just not very good with these things. I would like to talk to you today about the journey that brought us here today. Because if someone had walked up to us about 4 years ago and told me that Alfred would be doing a PhD in philosophy, and that I would be using my skills within visual culture to convert the process of making a documentary into that of creating a collaborative knowledge creation, I would probably have said, yeah, keep on dreaming. But that's a funny thing about life. It always surprises you in all these weird ways and confronts you with things you did not know was going to happen. And it'll challenge you and make you see that that things aren't always as they seem. And to be quite honest with you, I love this kind of challenge. Because in that exact moment, I know something is on the verge of going to happen. It's a place where my past meets my future in a way that I can feel it. And the air becomes totally crisp. And I know that something has actually died within me because I can feel that there's a new insight that's being born. And this might sound very beautiful and all, but it's actually a product of something quite violent and often of making mistakes or of failing. So it's not at all like that. But the funny thing about people is we like the known. We're not very fond of the unknown. And a lot of times when you confront people with the unknown, what they do is they cling on to what they know. And they'll do that by finding other people who decided to cling on to their old beliefs too. Unless, of course, you're one of these people that actually listens and opens up and tries to sort of understand or reevaluate the situation and changes your actions. Making this documentary, and also for Alfred writing this PhD, has very much been this process of opening up. because trying to understand the relationship between how the internet is changing knowledge and changing the relationship to us is very much about understanding society and the foundation of how we interact as people. So for those of you who do not know Alfred, he's writing a PhD, and it's a shared PhD, and it's shared between Roskilde University, the philosophy department there, and also the research and development department at Novozymes. And he started doing this about 2 years ago. And for Alfred, knowledge and life is not something static. So therefore he arranged for us to part of his PhD to go to California, to the Bay Area, to seek out where the birthplace of this whole new media was taking place. So we could look up and find the knowledge where it was at the given time. We found this little flat in Berkeley. It was very steep stairs, but it had an amazing view over the whole Bay Area, and you'll see that view many times in the film. And being so close to Berkeley University, Alfred couldn't help look up Hubert Dreyfus. He's a philosophy professor, and some people might know him for have written the book What Computers Can't Do, all the way back in 1972. Well, anyway, we went to Dreyfus, and he was there, this old man sitting in his office. And he let us in, and we talked to him and explained why we were there. And by the time we were finished, he suggested that Alfred became enrolled at the university with him as supervisor. Now, the thing is, normally to be enrolled at Berkeley, you would have to go through a committee, and you would have to apply for a deadline, and it was way past. So it couldn't have been without Dreyfus that Alfred actually became a PhD student there and got enrolled. And Dreyfus also played another big role in our whole journey. He shared his philosophy with us, and he opened up his family and also his old boys network to us, and that was very valuable. Another key person on our whole journey here was Joseph Jackson. He's one of the organizers behind the open science movement, and he's also a co-founder of a biohacker space in the Bay Area called BioCurious. And Joseph, he invited us to a hackathon in San Francisco. And that's actually the first time we met Cameron Nayland, who is here today. For those of you who do not know what a hackathon is, it's this open event where you come in and you can work on different projects that you wouldn't have been able to do by yourself. And it's about, computer stuff or science in that way. But the great thing about meeting Cameron there was that he gave us a really good take on what all the challenges were with opening research up, and why it was also needed. So I'm very happy to say that we have Cameron here today. He's going to be part of the panel debate, and later this week he's also going to talk to our Danish science minister about the new gatekeepers for science and research. We soon discovered that these new forms of collaboration were taking place, and that working together in this way could be potentially extremely powerful if it was done successfully. Because collaboration isn't easy. We actually talked to an anthropology professor at the Berkeley University, and his name is Paul Rabinov. I don't know if any of you heard of him. But anyway, he's done a lot of studying in collaboration. And we met with him, and Fortunately, he wouldn't let us film him, but he basically told us that it was impossible. There were too many barriers for it to be successful and for it to actually happen. So we got this feeling of these keys to collaboration, that they were actually really rare. But the thing is with collaboration, as he always also told us, is that one of the biggest barriers for this is often that if you want different fields to work together, you have a communication flaw, depending on the course or the field that you're from. So that night, I talked to Alfred, because I'm educated within visual culture. And if there's one thing that I know, then it is that visuality is a wonderful way of communicating more broadly, because it speaks in a different dimension. It speaks more to us as being humans in the world. And that's kind of when the idea for the documentary started to take form. But that's also when the whole trouble started. Because we'd never done a film before. And all the technical aspects of this we had to learn as we went along. And there was another aspect. I was pregnant. I had a really huge belly, looking pretty heavy. I was in 6 months. And we knew that if we were going to pull this off, that we needed both of us at our best. So I don't know if anyone in the crowd had been pregnant or maybe had a wife that's been pregnant, but you tend to worry a lot. And I was worrying too, but mostly about the future and about our environment. And somehow this whole idea of making this documentary about these keys to collaboration gave me this tiny little spark of hope that sort of grew within me. And it got me up in the morning. It kept me going, even though we made immensely many mistakes through the whole thing, because I believe that there was a reason for me to do this. And when I say we make many mistakes, well, let me give you a picture of what I mean. There was this one time, we were going to Google headquarters. We had actually arranged an interview with Dr. Windsurf. For those of you who do not know who he is, he's the vice president of Google, and he's also one of the fathers behind the internet. So we were riding along. It was a very, very warm day. I was really hot. And Alfred was carrying the tripod. And all of a sudden, it fell down and it broke. The tripod is this thing that you sort of put the camera on, so it's stable. And we must have been the most odd-looking documentary crew ever to show up at Google. Me all warm and sweaty, and Alfred there with his quite small camera. It doesn't really look like a film camera, right? And pretty much nothing else. And when we met Dr. Windsurf, we had to kindly ask him if he by any chance had some duct tape for a tripod. Another great mistake that I personally made was when we were back in Denmark and we needed to put all this footage that we had gathered together. Me being an academic, I sort of got this great idea. Okay, well, actually, to understand really the complexity of what we were doing, you would need to know that normally when you do a documentary, you do a very well-drafted storyline. You sort of put out from A to B, and you do storyboards so you know exactly what kind of takes you are going to have throughout the whole thing. And because we were using this film as a knowledge creation process, we couldn't do that. Because if we had done that, we would just have gotten something that would agree with what we already knew. So instead, we had to go on our intuition and much more curiosity, which has basically led us just deeper and deeper within this whole knowledge networks and within creating collaboration. So back in Denmark, I was sitting there with about 200 hours of footage and interviews and no storyline, and not ever having any experience in creating a storyline out of this. So I got this bright idea. I'm an academic, so I'll transcribe the whole thing. And believe me, it took time. But I thought, if I can get it down on paper, I can work it through, I can put it up, and we can just put the different bits, in a row, and we can make a movie that is actually going to make sense. So I did this, only to learn that the way people said these things, or why they said it, or the context in which they said it, was so much more important often than what they actually said. So after quite some time, I was back to ground zero. And I thought, okay, I have to do this differently. So I started learning Final Cut Pro. I don't know if any of you know this, but it's this really, it's not actually very good, but it's an editing program, quite a stubborn mule of an editing program. But it was my only way of getting to have this trial and error, which I so much needed to get the feel of what a movie was actually really about. And I just kept on doing that hours after hours after hours, not getting it right. And it might have had something to do with me just being, a first-time mom, so I wasn't sleeping very much either. But then all of a sudden, I was starting to get the feel of this, what it actually took. And then the next hurdle was getting the funding. Because one thing that I realized through this process was that we might have gotten all this great footage, but we needed someone with a bit of experience for the post-production to actually help us cut this film and make it look like a real movie. And that's when we started, we tried out crowdfunding, actually. And we were quite amazed that we actually got some funds that way. But the most amazing thing about crowdfunding was that it did have an unforeseen benefit. There were all these people that contacted us that wanted to share the news about the documentary or wanted to help us out in all these different ways. And actually, Daniel, who we have here, and Will, where are you, Will? So we met through this, because in India, they showed our, okay, yeah, I'll try to do it fast. I'm soon done. In India, they showed our trailer at a 2.0 health conference. And Daniel and Will saw it there. So they got connected to us through that. And today, Daniel, he's doing the voiceover for the film, and Will helped out with the subtexts. And actually, when I was speaking to Daniel last week, I had just heard his TED Talk, and there he speaks about the internet being this sort of social ocean with these waves of Twitters and blogs, and the only right way to navigate it is to be in touch with it, just like the surfer, you can go with the flow. And I really liked that metaphor, and I really wanted to incorporate it into the film. But the thing was, the footage Alfred had taken was pretty much mediocre of what we got of, not of all of it, but the surface stuff was, and we didn't really have a person that could give it that flow. But then Daniel remembered that Will had actually just gone to Spain and taken some great footage of surfers. So he sent that to me, and that's part of the movie today. So just a little thing about networking today. Luckily, we actually found funding, and that's partly because of this woman here, because Roskilde University supported us. They have actually been very open-minded and very daring in this whole new way of knowledge creation. And therefore, we are also very happy to have Hannelette here today to be part of the panel. So thank you so much for that. So we could finally get started on the movie. And yeah, okay, I'll round it up. Okay. Another person that I'll just quickly introduce who's also going to be in the panel today, is Ganot. Ganot, yes. He's a science manager at Novozymes, and he's been working really closely with Alfred because this film is not finished. It's only half finished, and what you're going to see is the first 2 chapters of it. And part of the film is this experiment where we try to create collaboration between a hackerspace and a biotech company, and there Novozymes actually dared to take a step into the unknown. And Gernot is now working with Malte, who's over here from L'Habitat, and they have actually set up a biohacker laboratorium here, where we'll be filming all week. So if you want to be part of a movie, there's a great chance. Just go there, collaborate. But enough of me talking. Let's see this film. Bear in mind, it's an experiment. It's only the first 2 chapters. It's not color graded yet, but we'd love to hear afterwards what you think, because we're still learning in the process. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you very much. Beautiful start of the afternoon. Let me invite the panel to join us at the table. And Hannah as well. Yes, please. Sæt du dig bare. Great. So what we will do now is we will have a small session, I guess 15 minutes, where we will open up the discussion and talk a little bit, invite some reflections on this key concept of Alfred and Katja's film, namely the idea of collaboration. And for that we have invited this afternoon Gernot Abel, who is a science manager and innovator at Novozymes, as Katja rightly said in the beginning. And also we have invited Cameron Nealon, who is the advocacy director at the Public Library of Science. I can say one of the great open access journals and movements worldwide for the time being. Also we have the pleasure of having Hanne Andersen serving on the panel this afternoon. She's the rector and professor at Roskilde University. And finally we have the filmmaker himself, Alfred, who will contribute with his reflection. But let me open up, give you a chance to reflect a little bit. What does collaboration actually mean to you? And I'm curious to know, what are you actually thinking when you see a film like this, and the potential and even the barriers of collaboration? Gernot, please.
Well, David, you mentioned the start, the Nature article.
Yes.
And for scientists, it's always a good point to disagree, even with Nature. Well, recently we went on a trip to the island of Ven, and as from some of you know about Hubert, he did this planetary observation there. And one might say, okay, he did it alone, right? He was a sole scientist at that point of time, but it turns out that he was actually collaborating. So he was sitting down in his planetary with 5-6 other guys, using different technologies to understand how those planets, stars are moving around. So maybe it's not that new that we're talking about collaboration, but it's good to bring it up to understand it, because getting back to why I'm sitting here, well, this is maybe a good outcome of an experiment. Because if you would have asked me 6 months ago, would I sit here today? No, probably not. But then there would happen this accident, which happens in science quite often, and it gives good results. I was asked at a meeting when our CEO, Peter Hulk, gave the last numbers of our financial status by innovation department. Would you like to work together with an open collaboration place? I said, well, let's do it. Let's try it. And that's probably the thing. You have to go for excellent. Allow those those things to happen, and not only reasoning but association is an important part of our science. So not only be fact oriented, but give it a chance.
Thank you. So the unpredictability is a part of collaboration. That's interesting. Cameron, how do you look upon collaboration as being this fourth age of research?
So I think I'm inclined to agree in part, in as much as collaboration isn't anything new, and I'm going to have to differ a little bit with Professor Thomas as well, in the sense that he makes the point that the world is changing and changing more rapidly, but the underlying notions of collaboration, the needs for the people to make the lenses, to build the telescopes, is something that's been going for a long time. What has changed, what is different, and what is perhaps exemplified by the movie and the connections made through it, is that the scale at which we can connect with people to find those individuals, whether they're professionals or amateurs who have a passion or an expertise for a particular thing, is made so much greater. The fact that it's 2 degrees of separation from Alfred to a Danish professor to Joseph to me,
right,
is an indication of how those connections can form in a way that's much more at a much greater scale today, and that's what makes the difference, that we can find the people who can help us make the change that we're looking to achieve.
Great. Hannah, I have to ask you this question that also Professor Thomas mentioned in the movie. Are we actually educating our students for the 20th century and not for the 21st century, in the sense that an institution like yours, a huge Danish university, are you making people prepared for this kind of transgressing collaboration that they will have to face in the future?
Well, asking Roskilde University, I have to answer yes, because we're working project-based, we're working with groups. We got group exams back. He's also talking about new assessment forms. But then again, I think that the whole system in Denmark at the moment and in Europe at the moment is going towards an older paradigm. We're not changing towards the 21st century. We are documenting, not as a documentary film, but documenting, writing. The system is preventing individuals from meeting. Researchers should only work with researchers from particular universities with the same ranking as theirs. Articles should be written in order to count in particular systems and not in order to create something new. So we are preventing that innovation. And of course, it's not that anything new goes. I think about that as a little critical thing to innovation. It's good always to try a lot, but you also have to have the motivation to go deep into the things you're doing and to repeat and to make mistakes and to challenge yourself, but to go on. I think that's one thing we also need in the Danish system at the moment. We're talking a lot about innovation.
So we're over to you, Alfred. If we can ask you to reflect a little bit upon why did this concept, why does this diagnosis come up in your film project? And I guess further on to that, how have you experienced as a filmmaker now also the collaboration between university and also industry with Novozymes and the way your PhD is financed, but also with the creative environment of filmmaking? How does that is that an easy collaboration? Has it been easy or has it been difficult?
That's a good question, David. I think it's been extremely challenging. The concept of making a film, it seems easy, but filmmakers they have years of experience often, and it's a whole system as well with different codes, a different way of doing it. But I can also see that doing this documentary have created kind of its own knowledge production, connecting some people through the film, through the camera, not me, but actually that this is something more concrete than I'm sitting writing a paper in philosophy, sharing with a few colleagues in philosophy. And that part is, for me, really interesting to see that that when you create things, you will meet people all over the world that will actually discuss with you, and that is actually what you're dreaming of, having this community in the scientific community, to have people that can, come up with their criticize and also help you. But it's different here because some people have no education, but they still help us. So that's not the gatekeeping thing. It's not, don't have to be a professor. I also, in the film, I talked to a good friend, Salim, and he just got an iPhone, and he's a Bedouin, and he have no education at all. He's sitting on a beach in Sinai, disconnected from the rest of the world. But now we have this iPhone. It's of course driven by sun power, and there's sometimes connection. So to talk to him about how to use technology, it just became, as Cameron also said, I think the new stuff, collaboration is probably, I think Darwin also wrote about collaboration. It's all concept, and it's always been a part of research. But the technology is creating a totally new platform for collaboration, but not everything is collaboration. I think that also for me, I really understand that I started a company 6 years ago, actually called Collaboration, and we failed again and again and again, and we didn't get any money, and we wanted to be a real business, but it was really, really difficult to create that platform and still creating into some kind of a real value for people. And it's taking a long time to take the concept of collaboration and actually turn it into something that is starting to be more vital. So, and here as well, collaboration is now a new buzzword, and I'm a bit against that, because in my world, it's such a difficult task and such a difficult challenge.
Great. So let me perhaps return to one of the sentences, if you allow, Cameron, from the interview you gave in the film, where you mentioned this idea of designing better incentive structures and giving people better, basically incentives, but also giving them better possibilities of collaborating. I mean, and I think many of us is all in for that, but can you actually design incentive structures, and can you in that way promote, let's say, collaboration, but it could also be other types of cooperative behavior? What is your take on that? You have been working also with journals, with real publishing houses, and with funding agencies.
It's a real challenge, and it's a real challenge in two or more than two ways. One is that we're talking about cultural change, and we're talking about cultural change within the academy, which is a conservative. I've been there. I've been a tenured academic, so it's a conservative community in very many ways. So cultural change is a challenge in and of itself. But it's also a challenge in the sense that wherever you set up incentives, whether as a result of history or whether in a deliberate sense, you get what you design for, which is often not what you wish for. So it's a real challenge to think about designing systems or trying to set up systems that push people in the right directions without creating just a new set of perverse incentives. The thing that seems to be a theme for me, and which has kept running through, is if we can create a system of incentives that reward researchers for having their research used. And I mean that in the very most general sense. So being used by other researchers in the way that we care about at the moment, as signalled through traditional citations in traditional journals. That's a form of use. But also through the evidence that their research articles or other outputs, videos, procedures, data, are being downloaded and looked at. My belief is, if we can find ways to measure a wide range and wide diversity of uses, and we can allow people to be rewarded for the kinds of use that they think is important for their research, then we'll go some way towards allowing both the diversity in the system, which is really important, but also fundamentally setting up the incentives so that it is in people's interest to think, I am doing this research and I want to communicate it, to make it available in the way which maximizes the potential and the reality for it to be used downstream. If we can do that, then I think we'll go a long way towards shifting the system from a place where we are now, where we do that in some ways, to a way in which we do it in a much more diverse set of ways.
Interesting. Perhaps, Gernot, I could also have you expanding a little bit on the way you, as also a company perspective on this discussion, has been changing systems and have moved from one system of collaboration into another one, more, I would say, transgressing in some sort. Today, you have established collaborations with Biologiegaragen, and you have sort of integrated what you're doing as a biotech company with some of these more open science environments. So what are your ideas about that? Actually taking science from one context into another one, where there might be other codes of conduct, so to speak.
Well, I think if it comes to if you want to have a science system today that generates an output, and it definitely does, right? And we want to turn this into some product, something in the market, something that is used. We, from a company side, observe many times, well, if you find an interesting article, interesting technology that has been published, the challenge of the academia is that you have to move on to a new item, to a new topic, to a new hype, to keep your funding going, right? So at the point of time, we as a company might find, okay, this is very interesting, shouldn't we investigate it? It's often difficult to mature that finding to a real interesting application. So academia is moving really fast due to that system, and it's too fast, maybe moving for a company, for the corporate world, to say.
Or even for the universities, as we heard.
So, and I believe in collaboration has to do something with interaction and educating, like Hannah was in educating the academia, the students, and so on. How do I interact with the outside world? And Biologiegaragen L'Habitat is an open space, is a real great place, because as a student you can come there 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, like you heard. You can even talk to company people like Novozymes. So you have a kind of a neutral meeting place. Well, if you go as a scientist to a company, have a meeting, it's always like, so how far can we go? How fast will they react? Can we get some funding here? The other way, if you go as a company to a scientist, they are pressed. How much focus can they really have on that development? So Biologiegaragen is a kind of a neutral ground. And it's a great, such makerspaces are great meeting points. So I would definitely love to see more kind of like Google does with some in London, where they have a basement where they have some startups moving in, and well, they can follow them. They don't have a direct link, but can we establish similar setups? And that will then generate the reward for the scientist really to work and continue on that.
That's a very good point. I also want to open up actually the discussion on the floor. So if any of you have comments, reflections, questions for the panelists, you are most welcome. And we will do this as informally as possible. So just put your questions to the audience. I will, however, just continue a little bit with one of our panelists for 1 second, if you allow me, Hanne. In the same sense that a company like Novozymes has also started to engage other types of communities. How do you see the role of universities, and I guess also of education, broadly speaking, in driving or even accelerating some of those trends or tendencies that we see unfolding, coming from a very non-institutional place like the makerspaces or the open science movements? How can the universities become drivers of change instead of, as some people sometimes says, become barriers to change?
I think the key word is to escape the systems.
Mm-hmm.
We make so many systems at the moment in order to control that we're doing the right thing. Even incentives. Whenever I think about incentives, I get a little bit scared, because then we create new incentives and then we start following them instead of doing the things in a more original way. We're taking away the freedom of the researchers at the moment. They have to follow specific rules in publishing and in getting the funding and describing their projects and describing the results of their projects and having a lot of administrative force to help them. So I think that it's not a coincidence that we are talking about garages and laboratories. We have a very big small success at Roskilde University, our Fab Lab. That we have made the same as in other places, in Helsinki, for example, a technical laboratory where people can walk in from the street and work together with our people and more or less 24 hours. And students work there and test things and creating such spaces where everybody comes and where you meet without an incentive and without a system. But that is difficult to create because of the way politicians think about taxpayers.
Right.
Taxpayers, that's not making our research available. That is proving that we have a right to do what we're doing. So we have a very strange way of thinking about research and education and collaboration at the moment. And we should free ourselves. But I do not see it coming. I see it only coming from the grassroots.
Yeah.
I don't see it coming from politicians or systems.
It's actually quite curious that the nature study I cited and that you have all now responded to actually has a pretty strong statement saying that when you have collaboration being enforced by public or even private funding councils or foundations, that's actually not where you will get most for your money. It's actually not. You're actually not able to manage or steer or even promote collaboration. It's the institutions that have enough flexibility, as you all said, and that is open to the unpredictability, as you also mentioned, Gernot. That's actually able to make that global impact. And then again, we are measuring here in that study impact as being something very specific in terms of citations. But still, it's a very clear message from even the empirical studies that we have that you have to let loose, you have to let go of some of the frameworks. So that at least supports your point there. There was a question up here. Can we have a microphone? Yes.
Thank you. This is a question for the entire panel or for anyone in the panel who might be interested in answering. We hear that collaboration in science has been around for a very long time and potentially also that there's even more need for it now. We see hacker spaces and labs as a response to breaking out of some of the perverse, very restrictive incentives that we find in traditional science. But then we also hear this whole story about all the new technological opportunities for connecting online. And the film started indeed with sort of funky clips with people blogging and chatting and so on. But the examples you give of new forms of collaboration are very much not online, they're offline. They're in little basements, garages, and so on. Any signs that we might see some of these new types of collaboration actually going online rather than being in a basement and a little lab somewhere?
Yes, please.
I try. Okay, great. You said, well, something is happening physically somewhere down in the basement, right? If you're then engaging in those DIY spaces, which I think is in the wording in itself, do it yourself, is not the correct word for in terms of collaboration, because it should be, say, DIT places, do it together. But when you're on those mailing lists and you follow it, then you will suddenly get a mail in, hey, we are a startup, we are looking for 4 square meters within the fume hood. Okay, and then you can actually engage in a totally different way, coming from the innovation side, traditional innovation departments will go to different conferences, matchmaking events, whatever. Well, and I agree fully, matchmaking events, they generate borders, because who will go there if you don't have a real crisp business case and have calculated the whole thing through? It's very difficult. But here you suddenly can engage and take opportunities and assist people, maybe in an altruistic fashion. So you don't know what's the outcome right from the way, but it's possible. So that's one of the cases. One of cases, what we have been doing here is also interacting with educational systems. So the Danish schools, folkeskole system, where we actively invite pupils to come to the Biologigaragen and participate in a hackathon or learning how to program a sensor platform. And to be then part in a Ung Forsker competition next year or after summer, and really upgrade also on that term. So what you might call corporate citizenship, but together with a place like Biologigaragen. And that's really something where we have suddenly teachers from the school system around. They are dedicated, they have the pedagogics on the right side. We can deliver technology and generate the interaction. And that's what we're doing, as we heard before, here on the Copen Lab platform area, where we have also open workshops where we invite broadly. So it's not a closed system, how I experience.
Great. I will take Alfred and then go to you, Cameron.
We're coming into that in chapter 3 as well. But also we make a distinction between mass collaboration online. You have a few good examples. Gaming have a good example on 50,000 researchers have gone together in one project to actually solve some of the core problem, and also got a Nature article, also the more conventional stuff. But the whole organization form was formed with the internet it was the platform for it. And normally you could never connect 50,000 researchers in a project like that. And also that is the mass collaboration. And also I think that we have to distinct between this loose ties, you have the social media and stuff, and then the stronger ties. And we can see here in our project, it's if you really want to collaborate in the core, you need some people who invest time and have the courage to actually go on this kind of journey, because in the beginning you will not have the systematic incentive, because there's nothing that you actually gain value for. Like this film, it's not something I have sorted out with university yet, so I still have to do a traditional PhD. So that's just an example that when you go new roads, you have to be prepared that you're not getting anything systematically in the way we normally think about it. So, but also looking at Malte and the way they connect and using the internet to share the results in a much different way than Novozymes. They have a big community for good and for bad. Sometimes it's really good when it works, but it's really open, and they have a lot of backside pitfalls in that as well. But when it works and you share you go into the lab and they do a test or something like that, and immediately you have it on the internet, and the network starts working on it in different countries, and the information gets back in an extremely fast way. So this is a different way. So there's so many different ways of actually using the technology, but it's a chapter for itself. If it works good, they have to play together. I think.
Yes, I think. I mean, it's actually a really good question, because I think I would say there are actually a range of scales we're talking about here. In a sense, what we've talked about here is solving the easy problem, which is connecting the people who could work in an exciting way together. And we've heard collaboration is hard. Human interactions are hard.
Yes.
You gain a huge amount by bringing people together face to face to interact. There are examples, I can give examples of science I've done with people that I've never met, but maybe I'll just tell a funny little story. Actually, what I've done, Garrett introduced himself to me at the beginning. I said, have we met somewhere before? And he pointed out to me that basically he'd connected with me on Twitter a few days ago. So actually, and I'm increasingly finding this thing of, have I met you, or am I just recognizing you from your Twitter avatar? The quality of interaction that we can have online is approaching that of the interactions that we can have face to face. And as that happens, these the quality of collaboration that can directly occur online, the strengthening of loose ties to weak ties as they need to for the solution of a particular problem, is going to increase. But it's a really important thing to look for and have good examples of.
Hannah, did you want to?
I was just reflecting. I've been reflecting a little bit on the genres of research, presentation, documentation, and work. And I actually discussed it yesterday with a jury of a doctoral dissertation, an American and two professors, one from the US and one from the Netherlands. And we discussed this in a very open way, that actually there are many forms and we're beginning to use them. Use documentation, of course, finding new forms of knowledge. And if you want to engage in new forms of knowledge in the humanities and social sciences, it's quite easy to invent and to use new genres with artistic and emotional pictures, with engaging in multimedia. So they were quite open to it, and I think I've seen PhD theses that would have at least some kind of product and a reflection, and using, of course, the more traditional modes. But I think we are seeing new ways of presentation.
That's great.
It's not quite solved, I can't promise. I've heard supervisors with different opinions, but we are beginning to discuss it. And I've also seen PhD theses where in the humanities and social sciences, where the principles of research and the way of finding examples would not cover what I would expect as a good old linguist and working with pedagogy at university. I would not have expected, but which I have accepted because they are new ways of finding new knowledge. Knowledge is not always on the system side. It is really moving.
Yeah, I would say on my own side, having worked together with a lot of policymakers also for the last couple of years as a civil servant, and also taking part in designing this Horizon 2020 research program that we are now entering at the European level, that one thing that I found particularly promising was actually the idea that people would have to go a little bit out of their disciplinary comfort zones. Then again, you have the whole framework and the machinery of incentives and designing, behavioral schemes. But in the end of the day, the idea that reality is complex. So therefore, also the human interaction and the scientific collaboration have to be complex. Solving those issues or challenges, as they say, is an extremely good insight, and I think that will be a good thing for science in the coming years. But I have to wrap up a little bit on this first part of the panel, and we will continue in a second. But if I can still just hang a little bit onto that. Balance or dichotomy or conflict between the conventional and the non-conventional, because now you actually all mentioned it, that we need to stay in the within still the conventions of company, or the conventions of scientific publishing, or the conventions of having a PhD degree. Just a short reflection on that. How can you still keep on challenging knowledge, but also hanging on to the gatekeepers we will discuss on Wednesday, and hanging on also to the accountabilities and to the ethics that was part of the science system? Will you reflect on that? Not really.
I think I tried to do it a little bit, and I tried before this to look up certain approaches that I have seen in other PhD theses, which and that's all this studying through, for example, is a way of engaging. That is two professors. I'm not going to quote. That would be, we have to quote in science. We have to know what we're standing on. We have to know where knowledge comes from. But it can easily be done in other forms than we're used to. But for example, saying that what we need is a methodology that recognizes that events consist of multiple happenings which radiate out from different directions, and seeking in new directions. I see it in lots of research at the moment. So I think that things are happening. And I think the whole idea of working in projects, which many universities do nowadays, more or less letting the student have the steering role. I think that is the important principle, at least at Roskilde University, and the whole old idea of project work, that you have to find your own research interest, and that can drive you so far once you have found that. And that's the whole thing about students formulating the problem themselves, because they will then work very, very hard. If it fails, it's very bad. But when it works, it's very strong. And at the moment, we are also, we have this going back to the systems, going back to the disciplines also. We were trying with the high school reform in Denmark to go to escape the disciplines and to work this way. But actually, we are re-entering into the disciplines because we think it's more safe and it's more controllable. But then we lose the research interest that even young people should find in their learning. And they can learn so fast if they learn by that principle.
Yeah, that's a very good point.
The radical version of what I'll say is that we need to get away from an obsession with quality while still really understanding what expertise brings to the solution of a problem, that expertise has value, that it can be challenged and should be challenged from different perspectives, but that it has real value. But this notion that there is some sort of scala natura of research quality is dangerous, to my mind. That's the radical version. The pragmatic version is that what we need to do is develop structures in parallel, and we need to experiment in parallel with traditional systems that are accepted, that are embedded in our current practices. And we need to encourage that experimentation in a way that allows for failure. Maybe not encourages failure. Failure in itself is not good. Learning from mistakes is good. Failing to learn from mistakes is very bad. And so we need to experiment in parallel. And when those things become self-evidently better than some element of our practice, then we'll be able to make the shift. But we shouldn't throw the baby and the bathroom out with the bathwater.
Great.
Okay, I agree to that one. What I see now from both the science and the industry, we need the diversity, right? I mean, that's part of our society, and that's always very difficult then from a university, as Hannah said, like perspective to have both diversity and specialization at the same time. So that's I would say a major challenge, because in the end, then if you change the university system, you need also again to study what was the effect. So how can we do that? Then you have that's where I think a documentary like Katja and Alfred doing is a great tool to visualize it in a completely different way, because I don't have to explain why this was great or why this was a bad idea. Somebody else will do it, and it really removes my accountability. We had that word before. And looking at the experiment, Novoscience is engaging right now. I mean, this is really a big change, because there's no corporate communication across and saying, well, you're allowed to say that, or no, you shouldn't move into that area. So breaking down borders is really essential here, making new connections, and then we're back to collaboration across many instances.
Actually, that very, very nicely leads over to the next segment of this afternoon, namely a small, very newly and I guess emerging project that we will just witness a couple of minutes of in a moment. But actually, on the exact point you mentioned, we will ask you in a couple of minutes to reflect a little bit on what the documentary as a genre of both filmmaking, but I guess also of knowledge production, can mean for both scientists but also filmmakers. And to do that, Christian Martini will introduce a couple of film clippings that we will see in a short while.
So just to understand where I come from, so I am also like Alfred, and that's where I know him from philosophy and doing a PhD in philosophy. But because I was contacted by a company or rehabilitation center working with people with brain damage, I'm also doing interdisciplinary PhD working with neuroscience. And the problem is not only being a philosopher trying to work with neuroscience, that can create collaboratory problems. But then being a philosopher like Alfred, which I am as well, that creates a lot more collaboratory problems. Because what I quickly found out was that if we are to solve some of the many problems that we have when working with people with brain damage, rehabilitation, psychotherapy, call it what you will, then the classical way will be, of course, to use science or research to go into it. But the point of departure, even though it is science, should not be just to write articles or focus on the article base. It actually should be to solve the problems, to help the persons. So what I quickly found out was I couldn't do it with the articles alone. So in a discussion with Olafur Eliassen, the Danish artist, he acknowledged this problem and really encouraged me to go into something which I would also call the unknown. So I started a big project down in Berlin with another Danish scientist called Jeppe Hein, who has a daughter with brain damage. And when I started that project, the avalanche started to roll, because then I was contacted by a documentarist, and then I was contacted by the theater to do more of these kind of things in order to understand what it means to live with a brain damage. However, as you also can see with Alfred, it's not that I'm now an expert, because I'm absolutely not an expert of either artist, theater or documentary. But what we do is that we try to collaborate with people that know these things. The idea is not to reinvent the wheel. That would just be a stupid way to go about it. It's to collaborate. So we contacted the Danish Film Institute and Creative Media Desk Denmark, because these are people that already are working with these things. And what we quickly found out was it's not only us that has these ideas. So in collaboration with these people, we invited a lot of Danish documentarists and scientists to discuss at a workshop. What can we get out of these things? Why should we collaborate? Why not just stick to what we are good at and then try to figure out what are the benefits of these things? And this is what you're going to see, some clips from this workshop.
So with those words, we are actually ending this afternoon session. Thank you to our panelists for joining us and for contributing. And thank you to Katja and Alfred and Christian as well. And I promise to say that if some of you wants to meet up for a beer or anything else, there will be plenty of possibilities just outside the room now, actually.